AIPAC and meet with President Trump this week. Trump recently said the U.S. should recognize Israeli control of the Golan Heights territory and called Democrats anti-Jewish and anti-Israel. The Jewish Democratic Council responded, saying that Trump should stop lying and using Jews as political pawns. Shannon Van Sant, NPR News.
Cleanup efforts continue in Houston following last week's massive fire at the ITC petrochemical plant farm. The chemical runoff went into the waterway, forcing the Coast Guard to close the Houston ship channel. Lieutenant Commander Jared Toxco says the oil in the water is now contained and that around 60,000 gallons of oil product have been removed from the water.
As of yesterday, 60,000 gallons of oily water product were recovered. Our focus today, in addition to the continued cleanup, is to look at options for potentially reopening the ship channel.
More than 50 ships are waiting to use that channel. It's one of the busiest commercial waterways in the country. Officials say they hope to have it reopened by tomorrow morning. You're listening to NPR News from Washington. The Viking Sky cruise ship has limped into port in Norway more than a day after issuing a Mayday call on a storm that led to helicopter rescues for around half the 1,300 people on board that ship that sent it rocking back and forth. Israeli Prime Minister is heading to Washington. He will meet with President Trump tomorrow and address AIPAC, the largest pro-Israeli lobbying group. It started today. 3 people have been charged with trafficking babies from the Marshall Islands to the United States. The BBC's Kat Wiener reports the charges mark the island's first legal move to stop illegal adoptions.
One of those charged was arrested last year after attempting to board a flight to Hawaii with 2 women, one pregnant and one carrying a month-old baby, who admitted they intended to have their children adopted in the United States. The case is being seen as an attempt by the Marshall Islands authorities to clamp down on the illegal but lucrative trade. The country enjoys visa-free access to the United States, and it's believed that each year dozens of pregnant women are recruited to travel there to deliver their babies. A high teenage pregnancy rate in the Marshall Islands, coupled with widespread unemployment and poverty, has fueled the industry.
The BBC's Kat Wiener reporting. UK Prime Minister Theresa May is facing more scrutiny from her cabinet members amid media reports that some are trying to force her to step down amid that failed Brexit deal. This after hundreds of thousands protested in the streets of London yesterday, demanding a second referendum on Brexit. The Powerball lottery jackpot now stands at $250 million. It's the country's 4th largest jackpot in U.S. history. This is NPR News.
Welcome back to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 5 minutes after the hour.
Hello there. Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio. I am Kat Hobson, your host, and I hope that you have had a glorious weekend. We have had beautiful weather, and I am so spoiled now I may never be the same. I am joined tonight, and very happily so, by Cheryl Costa, who is everything. She is a UFO researcher who wrote the book with Linda Miller Costa, her wife, UFO Sightings, book reference, 2001 through 2015. She is a military veteran of 2 branches of service. She is a retired information officer of the aerospace engineer industry. She has been a speaker at the International UFO Congress and MUFON Symposium. She's going to be speaking at the Ozark Mountain, the 32nd Ozark Mountain UFO Conference. She is going to be speaking this week at the UFO MegaCon in Laughlin, Nevada. And I'm so hating I'm going to be missing that. That's going to be a great con. And she is also a journalist. She writes the New York Skies for the Syracuse New Times. And Cheryl, welcome back. And I am so excited to have you because this has been one of my favorite conversations. We got up on a little tangent there, health related, but good information for anybody who's dealing with those things. And I want to talk to you about some of the articles and columns that you've written.
Okay.
And I have my favorites. We all have our favorites. But tell me about Rip Van Winkle.
Oh my goodness. Okay. When I retired, I found I've been doing a lot of college classes over the years. Okay. Independent study kind of thing. And I wanted to finish my degree. And I had moved back to New York State back in 2007. And I found out that if you're a combat veteran, you could go to any state university of New York school for free.
Well, that's wonderful.
If you could document that you'd been a combat veteran. And so that didn't take much of an effort. So I was finishing up a bachelor's degree. And I'm dyslexic as hell. I really am. And I use audio. I never would have gotten through Harry Potter, all the Harry Potter books, if I hadn't had audiobooks.
Oh, well, thank goodness you did, because that would have been something awful to miss. I'm an avid fan.
Well, you get the idea. So, like if there's a James Patterson book or something like that I want to read, I really have to wait until I can get the audio book for it, because it's much easier for me to involve in the story if I have somebody reading it to me. If I'm looking at a wall of text, it just gets gobbledygook. Well, the bottom line is this. I told my advisor, I said, look, don't be putting me into any writing classes or literary classes that give me a doorstop of a book, War and Peace or something like that, and expect me to read it. I'm not going to be able to do it. Okay. Get me something different. And she came back to me and said they have this class called short fiction. I said, sounds good. Let's try it. So what they ended up giving me was a doorstop of a book, but it was 200 short stories. Some of them as little as a page, some of them upwards of 10 or 15, maybe I think the biggest one in there was 15 pages. Okay.
That's pretty cool.
And the deal was on the class, we had to read 30 of these things. We had to write 7. I don't want to call them book. In my case, she did it on book reports. I went to my professor and said, look, can I just write an analysis? And she said, that's even better. Do it. So I wrote analysis. And then one of the things was pick a story that you like and write a sequel to it. Okay, which I did. And the sequel, again, I used to be a playwright. I'm still a playwright, and I'm very good at matching things. So what happened was usually I'd send one of my assignments in, and I'd get it back a week later with a grade, right? Maybe 2 at the outside. 6 weeks later, this one paper I sent where I wrote the sequel to the story, I called the professor up. I said, hey, Maureen, what's going on? Where's my papers? She said, well, we've been plagiarizing, checking it. I said, what do you mean? He says, well,
oh my gosh.
We read the story. Several other people here read the story, and we felt that it was a second story that the original author wrote about the book, wrote around his story. I said, oh yeah, you got faked out by the fact that I matched the author's voice. And I said, yeah, we did, and we know it's yours.
Right.
So I said, fine, whatever. But the other thing you had to do was do a paper. And it was just, I wanted to be a big paper. And one of the stories I had never read personally. It was Washington Irving's Rip Van Winkle. Now, I had a teacher in grade school read it to us, right? And we've seen probably cartoons over the years. Maybe they had a Rip Van Winkle aspect to the cartoon or something like that. So I was loosely familiar with it, but I had actually never read it myself. And I've been writing the UFO column at this point about 2 or 3 years. And I read the Rip Van Winkle story, and I said, my God, this reads like an abduction story.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I brought this up with some UFO researchers in New York, and they said, oh, yeah, we wrote a couple of papers like that. There's like 3 or 4 of them out there, right? So, but I went to my professor, and he said, look, I write this UFO column, and this Rip Van Winkle story reads like an abduction story. Maybe it's a colonial or Native American thing from colonial times down in the Hudson Valley. Can I explore that? She said, yeah, do it by all means. So about a month before the paper is due, this 2 months later. This is going to
be awesome.
Okay, so I call her up. I say, Maureen, we got a problem. She says, what? I says, well, my paper is beginning to look more like a history paper than an English paper. And she says, okay. And I said, then there's another problem. And she says, what's that? And I said, well, it didn't happen the whole incident did not happen in the Hudson Valley. She says, what do you mean? I said, well, first thing, the bad news is Washington Irving plagiarized a German author.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. And again, this is the research work we were doing. And she says, well, where did it happen? And I says, probably the Clefesen Mountains in central Germany in the 16th century, And she said, I told her a couple of the highlights of the thing. And she said, Cheryl, follow the evidence. I don't care where this goes. Go with it. You're on to something. Okay.
What a great supportive instructor.
Yeah, I was surprised because I was afraid I was going to be getting an F on this project, So I did, and it turned out to be about a 5,000 or 6,000 word paper. So I had to explain all this stuff with Washington Irving lifting this other guy's story, a guy by the name of J.J. Nightingale. And Washington Irving embellished, okay, because the original Nightingale story was only really about 3 pages, and it was called Klaus the Goat Herd. Okay. And if you read Klaus the Goat Herd, which happened to be in this short story book that we had, if you read that one, it read even more like an abduction story. And so
my word.
It's a personal account because Washington Irving embellished his story with all the Knickerbocker Club and the nasty wife and all that kind of stuff, and the stuff of like Rip Van Winkle waking up 20 years later and it was now the United States, not a colony, and da-da-da-da. Okay. He embellished with all that stuff. But the Klaus the Goat Herd actually involved just what happened of this guy's goats running off into some secret place. And when he went in there, he found not the thing in the Washington Irving. They talk about finding a little gnome like guys dressed in antique Dutch clothing. No, he goes into this cave and finds 12 ancient knights. Okay. And I thought, what the heck, this is getting into that story aspect of the king in the mountain kind of thing, So I went there. There's about 15 historical stories if you research it. Some of them are Hindu, some of them are in the Bible, things like this, of people who went to sleep one night and woke up 60 years later or 100 years later or 300 years later. Okay? And so there's some basis of historical references there. But in this case, the one thing that was in common with both stories, okay, was the idea of how long they were with these guys, and basically about 2 years. And the fact that when they woke up, whenever you see the cartoons, things like this, they always show Rip Van Winkle waking up. He's got a beard down to his ankles. Right? Okay. Actually, no, both texts, both Nightingale's text and Irving's text, say he grew a foot-long beard. Okay. When I had to go and talk to a beauty school. And I talked to the beauty school and I said, what is the growth rate for somebody in Germanic? And they said about a half an inch a month beard growth. So assuming he was just maybe a little bit of 5-day shadow kind of thing, over 24 months, he would have grown a foot-long beard, half an inch a month, roughly. Okay. All right. So if he was abducted and was up there doing the things with them with their 9 pins or whatever the heck he said he was doing, he was gone 20 years, but because of dilation of time, with going at the speed of light and that type of thing, he only aged 2.
This is amazing.
Okay. And so that was the kind of forensic stuff we looked at in this paper. And I sent it in to my professor, and
this is cool.
I got a note back from her and said, Cheryl, get this published someplace. This is brilliant.
That is brilliant. And I'm amazed that it wasn't.
And the goofy thing is, up until nobody will publish it. The ancient alien folks didn't want it. I went to a number of UFO and paranormal magazines. Nobody was interested.
Even the one with the strange and unusual but true.